At the termination meeting, my boss slid the papers across his desk saying, "This is how the real world works. Don't take it personally after stealing credit for my $20 million contract." I walked out and opened my laptop that same night. The moment felt surreal sitting in his corner office that reeked of stale coffee and expensive cologne. After 5 years of building Carson & Blake's most complex consulting strategies, after working until 1 a.m. and missing my daughter Ellie's recitals, I was being dismissed like a disposable temp worker. Matt Brennan, my boss and senior partner, didn't even have the decency to look apologetic as he pushed the termination papers toward me. "I'm sorry, Claire, but we need fresh voices. New energy. You know how this goes." No, I didn't know. Not like this. Not after what I'd sacrificed for them. 2 weeks earlier, I had finished the Faulkner Industries proposal, the most complicated, high-stakes pitch we'd ever attempted. 3 months of my life building the strategy, crunching data, aligning growth forecasts. It had taken every ounce of my expertise in market analysis and strategic consulting. The day before the presentation, I'd found the final version on his desk with my name nowhere on it. "Don't worry, Claire," he'd said then, waving it off. "This is just how these things work. You'll get credit internally." I should have pushed back then. I should have documented everything, but I trusted the system, trusted that merit would be recognized. Now I was being walked out by an HR representative I barely knew, my cardboard box in hand, email disabled, keycard deactivated before I even reached the elevator. But what Matt didn't know was that I never deleted anything. As a senior project strategist with a background in data systems, I maintained comprehensive cloud archives of every project, every version, every edit. I had saved every iteration of the Faulkner proposal, including the original concept sketch with my name and timestamp. More importantly, I had something he couldn't have anticipated, a direct connection to Sophia Lin, CEO of Faulkner Industries. Sophia and I had worked together 6 years ago when she was running her startup. I designed the growth model that helped secure their Series B funding round. She'd told me then, "If you ever need a real opportunity, call me. The people who build things deserve more than the people who sell them." I'd never called, but sitting in my car in the parking garage, my hands trembling with adrenaline rather than fear, I realized it was time. That night, while Ellie slept in the next room, I opened my personal laptop and accessed my secure cloud archive. Every version of the Faulkner proposal was there, meticulously organized with timestamps and revision notes. The original strategy framework, the market penetration analysis, the risk mitigation protocols, all bearing my digital signature and creation dates. I wasn't just angry about being fired. I was strategically positioned to prove theft of intellectual property. I drafted an email to Sophia. "I hope this finds you well. You may not remember me, but we worked together during your early funding round. I'm writing because I recently left Carson & Blake, and there's something you need to know about the Faulkner proposal that was presented to you." My finger hovered over send. What I didn't realize then was that this single email would trigger a chain of events that would dismantle the very company that thought they could erase me. By the end of the week, I'd be sitting across from my former boss, not as his employee, but as his biggest threat. At the next morning, my phone buzzed with Sophia's response. "Claire, of course I remember you. I still use the growth model you built for our Series B funding round. Let's talk. I have some questions and an opportunity I think you'll want to hear about." Sophia Lin wasn't just any CEO. She was a rising star in the tech world, known for being sharp, ethical, and unafraid to shake up entire industries. Her company, Faulkner Industries, had grown from a small startup to a $500 million operation, and she had a reputation for demanding transparency in all her business dealings. If she wanted to talk, this wasn't just a courtesy call. I called her that afternoon. Her assistant put me through immediately. "Claire," Sophia said, her voice calm but with an edge I recognized from our previous work together. "I've reviewed the documents you sent, and I'm livid." The proposal wasn't authored by the person who presented it to you, I said, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. That was my work, every analysis, every projection, every strategic recommendation. Of course it was, she replied without hesitation. I knew the moment I saw the methodology. It had your analytical fingerprints all over it. The same systematic approach you used for our growth model 6 years ago. For the next 30 minutes, Sophia grilled me with sharp, detailed questions about the research methodology, the data modeling techniques, and the specific way I'd structured the financial projections. I answered every single one easily, because it was mine. Every algorithm, every market assumption, every risk calculation had come from my expertise and analysis. Claire, she said finally, I'm terminating the contract with Carson and Blake, effective immediately. My heart skipped. You're sure about that decision? Absolutely. I don't do business with liars, and I don't reward theft, but I also don't believe in letting brilliant work go to waste. We still need the strategy implemented, and I was already planning to launch a new consulting venture. I want you to come in as partner and CEO. The position is yours if you want it. I sat, stunned silence. CEO. Me. The woman Matt had just dismissed as lacking leadership material was being offered the chance to run my own firm. You always had a mind for building systems and strategies, Claire. You just never had the space to lead. I can give you that space, but I need an answer quickly. I want to hit the ground running. I need some time to think about this, I said, though my analytical mind was already calculating the possibilities. I understand, but don't take too long. You deserve more than a footnote in someone else's success story. After we ended the call, I sat staring at my phone, mind racing through the implications. This wasn't just about revenge against Matt Brennan. This was about reclaiming my professional identity and proving that the real world could work differently when principled people had the power to change it. That evening, I explained everything to Ellie as she sat cross-legged on my bed in her oversized hoodie. At 13, she'd already learned to read the stress signals that meant Mom's work was affecting our lives. They fired you? She asked, eyes wide. But you work harder than anyone I know. I know, sweetheart, but something better might be coming, something that could change everything for us. She studied my face with the serious expression only kids who've grown up fast can manage. Are you scared? Yes, I admitted, but I'm also ready. The next morning, I called Sophia back. I'm in. Excellent. Your new title is CEO of Lynn Harper Strategic Consulting. I've already instructed my legal team to begin incorporation paperwork. Within 2 hours, the news broke across industry channels. Faulkner Industries cancels $20 million contract with Carson and Blake, citing leadership concerns and misrepresentation issues. Internal sources reported that the company was caught completely off guard by the contract termination. I smiled, imagining the look on Matt Brennan's face when he saw that headline. But that was only the beginning of his problems. The next day, his assistant desperately tried to schedule an emergency call with Faulkner Industries to salvage the partnership. Sophia forwarded the email request to me with a brief note. He wants to speak with the CEO about reconsidering the contract termination, your move. So the following morning, when the call was patched through and Matt's voice came on the line, panicked and desperate, I took a deep breath and delivered the words I'd been rehearsing. This is Claire Harper. You're speaking with the CEO of Lynn Harper Strategic Consulting. The silence on the other end was electric. For several seconds, all I could hear was shallow breathing. Claire, he finally managed. I wasn't expecting you to be involved in this. I figured as much, I replied evenly. But then again, you also didn't expect me to have documented proof that the Faulkner proposal was my original work, or that I had a pre-existing professional relationship with their CEO. He gave a weak chuckle, the kind someone uses when scrambling to regain control of a situation they've already lost. Look, Claire, this is clearly some kind of misunderstanding. I didn't know there was an issue between us. Had I known you were still involved with Faulkner, I would have handled your transition differently." The audacity was breathtaking. "You didn't know there was an issue. You removed my name from the final version of the proposal I created. You presented my strategic analysis as your own work to the client. Then you fired me 2 days later. But there was no issue." His tone shifted, becoming more defensive. "I was under pressure from the board. We needed to make cuts. You know how this business works. And honestly, Claire, while you're certainly a talented analyst, you were never really leadership material." That stung more than I expected, not because I believed it, but because it was the same dismissive rhetoric I'd heard for years. Too methodical, too detail-oriented, too collaborative, somehow never quite enough for the boys' club that ran most consulting firms. "You're making a mistake here," he continued. "And I don't just mean walking away from your career at Carson and Blake. You're burning bridges you might need later in your career. Think about your future. Think about your daughter's future." That was the moment I felt the conversation shift decisively. He had just tried to weaponize my child against me, and any remaining doubt about my decision evaporated. "You don't get to bring my daughter into this," I said, my voice turning cold. "And I'm not burning bridges. I'm building my own infrastructure. The difference is that I'm building it on a foundation of integrity, rather than theft and manipulation." After a long pause, he sighed deeply. "You know, Claire, you used to be different. You used to be grateful for the opportunities we gave you. Grateful, as if everything I'd earned through skill and dedication had been a charitable donation on their part. I was never grateful for being systematically undervalued and having my work stolen," I replied. "I was committed and loyal, but that loyalty ended the moment you decided I was disposable. I'm not the one who should be worried about the future here, Matt. You are." I hung up and immediately began executing the next phase of my strategy. That same afternoon, Sophia and I met in her downtown Chicago office. The space was sleek and modern, filled with natural light and the kind of purposeful energy that comes from people who believe in what they're building. "You handled that call perfectly," she said after I described the conversation with Matt. "But prepare yourself. People like that don't go quietly. They'll try to control the narrative." She was absolutely right. By Thursday, stories began circulating through LinkedIn and industry channels I still had contacts within. Matt was spinning a new narrative, that I had left the firm voluntarily after struggling with performance issues, that I was bitter and unstable, difficult to manage and prone to taking credit for collaborative work. It was predictable, but I had spent 5 years in strategic consulting. I documented everything. Not because I expected corporate warfare, but because I was naturally systematic in my approach to complex projects. Every email, every project timeline, every performance review was archived in my personal cloud storage. That evening, I received a message from Julia Reeves, a former colleague who had been one of the few people at Carson and Blake I genuinely respected. "Claire, I don't know if you've seen what's being said about you, but I want you to know that several of us have your back. We all know the truth about who really drove those successful strategies, and if you need witnesses, we're ready to step forward." She wasn't alone. Over the next 2 days, I received calls and messages from more than a dozen former coworkers, all sharing similar experiences of having their contributions minimized or their credit reassigned to senior partners. Many had been too afraid to speak up while still employed, but my public departure had given them permission to acknowledge what they'd witnessed. "You were the first person brave enough to walk away," Julia told me during a coffee meeting, "but now that you have, some of us are ready to follow your lead." By the end of that week, I had assembled something much more powerful than just my own documentation. I had corroborating testimony, screenshots of internal communications, and pieces of a comprehensive puzzle that painted a picture of years of systematic manipulation and unethical business practices. The most satisfying part was that I didn't need to use any of it immediately, because Carson and Blake's board of directors was already getting nervous. On Monday morning, a notice appeared on their investor relations page. The Faulkner Industries contract had been officially terminated, revenue projections were being revised downward, and stock value dropped 6% by midday. Then I received an email that I hadn't expected, sent from an anonymous company account. This is confidential, but the board is conducting an investigation into leadership practices. Several partners have raised concerns about the handling of key client accounts, including Faulkner. There's discussion of a significant leadership transition. You didn't just walk away, Claire. You exposed something we'd all been pretending not to see. I read that message 3 times before closing my laptop. My hands were completely steady now. Matt had told me I was making a mistake, but it was becoming clear that the only mistake I'd made was staying loyal for as long as I did. Within a week, industry whispers had turned into mainstream headlines. Top consulting firm loses flagship client amid leadership controversy. Carson & Blake in crisis mode after executive ethics investigation. Industry insiders report mass exodus of senior talent. I watch the updates from my home office, my phone lighting up constantly with new messages. Each headline felt like quiet vindication, not because I wanted revenge, but because truth was finally forcing its way to the surface. At Lynn Harper Strategic Consulting, Sophia and I moved quickly to build our team. We recruited smart, ethical professionals, many of whom had left Carson & Blake shortly after my departure. Others came from Sophia's extensive network in the tech and finance sectors, but every single hire shared our commitment to building something honest, transparent, and excellent. For the first time in my career, I wasn't just executing someone else's vision. I was creating the strategic framework, setting the cultural standards, and establishing the operational protocols that would define how we worked with clients. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Matt Brennan wasn't finished. He wasn't someone who accepted defeat gracefully, and I suspected he was working behind the scenes to minimize the damage to his reputation. That Friday, my attorney Dana Foster called with news I had been expecting. "You're not going to like this," she said without preamble. "Carson & Blake has filed a cease and desist order against you, claiming you used proprietary information to launch your competing business and illegally poach their client." I actually laughed. "You mean the client whose contract I wrote, whose strategy I designed, and who was already my professional contact before I even joined Carson & Blake?" "Exactly. It's a classic intimidation tactic. They're hoping you'll panic and settle quietly, or better yet, just fold the new company." "Let them try," I said. "We documented everything from the beginning." "I know, but I want to be proactive rather than reactive. We're filing a countersuit for defamation, wrongful termination, and professional misrepresentation. We'll also be submitting supporting statements from your former colleagues. Marcus Hoffman and several others have already signed affidavits." I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the Chicago skyline. A month ago, I was just trying to survive in a hostile work environment. Now I was defending my reputation in federal court, while simultaneously building the consulting firm I'd always dreamed of leading. What surprised me most wasn't the speed of the escalation, but how many people stepped forward to support me. Marcus, a senior analyst I had mentored, reached out with detailed documentation showing how my name had been systematically removed from internal project credits over the past year. Rebecca Stone, a former HR representative, provided original performance evaluation files proving that my ratings had been artificially downgraded in the months before my termination to create justification for firing me. "They were laying legal groundwork to remove you long before they actually did it," she explained during our call. "This wasn't a budget cut or restructuring. This was a calculated plan to steal your work and eliminate the person who could prove it." Even knowing what I knew, that revelation was difficult to process. They hadn't just used my expertise, they had systematically erased my contributions while building a case for my dismissal. Dana moved aggressively with our legal response. Within days, she filed comprehensive documentation, including proof of my original work, email threads establishing my relationship with Sophia, and sworn statements from 5 former Carson and Blake employees willing to testify under oath about the company's unethical practices. The cease and desist order was withdrawn within 48 hours. No apology, no explanation, just silence, which was the clearest admission of guilt we could have asked for. The following week, Sophia and I presented our official launch strategy to potential investors. Our pitch focused on integrity-driven consulting, sustainable long-term strategies rather than quick fixes, and transparent client relationships built on documented expertise rather than relationship politics. The room was electric with interest, and we secured our first 2 major contracts that afternoon. As I rode the elevator down from that presentation, I felt a complex wave of emotions, pride, amazement, and an underlying grief for all the years I had spent seeking permission to lead instead of simply taking the initiative to build something meaningful. That evening at dinner, Ellie looked up from her homework and asked, "Mom, how was your day?" "Really good, sweetheart. We officially launched the company and it looks like we're going to be successful." She smiled, that bright, genuine expression that reminded me why all the risk and stress was worthwhile. "My teacher asked us to write about someone who inspires us. I wrote about you." I felt my throat tighten. "Why me?" "Because you didn't let them stop you from doing what you're good at. And because now you get to be the boss and make sure other people don't get treated the way they treated you." 2 months later, Lynn Harper Strategic Consulting had officially onboarded 4 major clients, including 2 direct competitors of Carson and Blake. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same firm which had dismissed me as lacking executive presence was now watching from the sidelines while I led strategy sessions with Fortune 500 decision makers. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about building something sustainable and ethical, something that proved business could be conducted with integrity without sacrificing excellence or profitability. The real validation came when the first major media outlet reached out for an interview. The article was titled, "From Discarded to Disruptor: The Woman Who Turned Her Firing into a CEO Position." The reporter had done thorough research, uncovering details about the Faulkner contract situation and even referencing internal memos that had been leaked by former Carson and Blake employees. "I'm not looking for a fight with my former employer," I told her during our phone interview, "but I am committed to changing the narrative around how talented professionals should be treated in this industry. What happened to me wasn't an isolated incident, and I refuse to pretend it was normal or acceptable." When the article went live, the response was overwhelming. My inbox filled with messages from women in consulting, finance, tech, and other male-dominated industries. This gave me the courage to document the harassment I've been experiencing. "Your story is identical to mine, just different names and companies. I've been silent for too long. Thank you for showing me that speaking up is possible." I should have felt proud and empowered, but instead I felt the weight of responsibility. Because with every message that came in, I realized how widespread and systematic these problems were across entire industries. 2 days after the article was published, Dana called with an update. "They've hired a crisis management firm and are preparing a public response. Don't be surprised if they release a statement trying to get ahead of this story." Sure enough, Carson and Blake published a blog post titled, "Moving Forward, Learning from the Past and Building Stronger Teams." It was filled with corporate speak about miscommunications, organizational transitions, and renewed commitment to employee development. They didn't mention me by name, but the timing made their motivation transparent. Then Matt Brennan appeared on an industry podcast to give his side of the story. "I think we live in an era where people are quick to assign blame rather than take responsibility," he said smoothly. "Look, I've made mistakes, we all have, But the truth is that not everyone is suited for the pressure and complexity of senior-level leadership. Sometimes people misinterpret normal business decisions as personal attacks. It was expertly rehearsed corporate damage control, designed to seem reasonable and measured while subtly undermining my credibility. But what came next surprised even me. That evening, I received a LinkedIn message from Nina Rhodes, who had been senior partner and co-founder of Carson & Blake before retiring several years earlier. Her name still carried significant weight in the Chicago business community, and I hadn't spoken with her since her retirement party. Her message was brief. "Claire, I've been following recent events. I believe you, and I think it's time someone with institutional knowledge spoke publicly about the cultural problems that have been developing at the firm. If you're open to it, I'd like to meet." We arranged to have coffee at a quiet cafe in Lincoln Park. Nina looked distinguished and composed, carrying herself with the same quiet authority I remembered from our brief interactions years earlier. "I stepped down from active partnership before Matt took full control," she explained, "because I saw the direction things were heading and didn't want to be part of that transformation. But I never expected the situation to deteriorate this dramatically or this quickly." "You knew there were problems?" I asked. She nodded grimly. "I suspected, but I didn't have concrete evidence, and I wasn't brave enough to dig deeper or confront the other partners directly. That was my failure, and I've regretted it ever since." I studied her expression, looking for any hint of performance or manipulation, but saw only genuine regret and determination. "You weren't the only talented person Matt tried to marginalize and erase," she continued. "You were just the first one with the courage and resources to hold him publicly accountable." She reached into her briefcase and handed me a flash drive. "These are internal documents from my final 6 months at the firm, performance evaluations, meeting transcripts, board communications, and strategic planning documents. I think they'll support your case if you choose to take this further." My heart raced as I accepted the drive. "Why are you doing this now?" "Because it's time the truth had more advocates than the lies," she said simply, "and because you reminded me what principled leadership actually looks like." That night, I reviewed the contents of Nina's flash drive. She hadn't exaggerated. There were smoking gun documents showing deliberate manipulation of employee evaluations, meeting transcripts where Matt discussed using layoffs as distraction tactics during PR crises, and even a draft presentation to the board titled "Restructuring Strategy: Quietly Replace High-Risk Personnel Before IPO Consideration." I wasn't classified as high risk because of performance problems. I was high risk because I had institutional knowledge, asked inconvenient questions, and had the analytical skills to recognize and document unethical practices. The next morning, I forwarded the materials to Dana. Her response came within minutes. "We need to go public with this. This isn't just about your individual case anymore. This is systematic corporate fraud. Are you prepared for that level of exposure?" I stared at her message for a long time. Was I ready to become the public face of a corporate accountability movement? Was I prepared for the professional and personal scrutiny that would follow? Yes, absolutely yes. Dana and I spent the entire weekend reviewing every document, ensuring that every claim was substantiated and every timeline was accurate. We weren't just exposing individual misconduct, we were documenting a pattern of systematic abuse that could set legal precedents for how consulting firms treat their employees. By Monday morning, we had submitted a comprehensive report to the Wall Street Journal, along with a formal complaint to the Department of Labor and the Securities and Exchange Commission. The complaint cited patterns of employee misrepresentation and fraudulent corporate disclosures that had been used to inflate company performance metrics during investment discussions. When the story broke, I felt calm and focused rather than terrified. The article went viral within hours, trending on LinkedIn and being shared across professional networks nationwide. Consulting giant accused of systematic employee retaliation. Internal documents reveal pattern of credit theft and performance manipulation. Former executive sparks industry reckoning over corporate ethics. Suddenly, I wasn't just the woman who had been fired unfairly. I was the catalyst for an industry-wide conversation about accountability, ethics, and the treatment of talented professionals who refuse to stay silent about misconduct. My phone didn't stop ringing for 3 days. Journalists, former employees from consulting firms across the country, women in finance and tech who had experienced similar treatment. Some called my actions courageous. Others suggested I was committing career suicide. But for me, it was simply necessary. The ripple effects were immediate and comprehensive. Within a week, 2 senior executives resigned from Carson & Blake. Anonymous sources confirmed that the board had been aware of internal problems for years, and a former HR director went on record confirming systematic efforts to silence employees who raised ethical concerns. Matt Brennan was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His LinkedIn profile disappeared overnight. No posts, no updates, just digital silence. I didn't celebrate or gloat, not even for a moment, because this had never been about personal revenge. It was about recognition for the hundreds of professionals who build things behind the scenes and then get dismissed like they never mattered. It was about changing systems rather than just winning individual battles. 3 months later, Carson & Blake formally settled both the individual and class action lawsuits that had emerged from the investigation. The settlement included financial compensation, a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and mandatory implementation of new employee protection protocols, including an independent ethics board and quarterly transparency audits. As part of the settlement agreement, I declined the standard non-disclosure clause. If they thought they could buy my silence after everything that had happened, they fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. I remained as CEO of Lynn Harper Strategic Consulting, guiding the firm through rapid growth while maintaining our commitment to ethical practices and employee development. More importantly, I stayed visible in industry conversations, speaking at conferences and writing about the importance of accountability in professional environments. Because stories like mine only create lasting change when they're shared openly, when they demonstrate to others that their experiences aren't isolated incidents, and when they prove that principled people can build successful alternatives to corrupt systems. For me, this was never an ending. It was the beginning of the career and the life I had always been capable of building. Once I stopped asking for permission and started taking strategic action, the real world works exactly the way we decide to build it.